what I wanted people to get from the book is this, is that broken systems create broken outcomes and they create broken people. A lot of the teachers that you say, when you ask them why they left, number one, it's always behavior. The reward system for the kids' brains has been hijacked by these tablets, by these iPhones. So they find it almost impossible to read a book. I think we are in a political crisis. I think we're in an economic crisis. We're in a cultural crisis. We're in a societal crisis. We have been a culture and a nation that has been addicted to lying to ourselves. And you can do that. You can do that for a long period of time, but eventually reality hits home. The unpleasant truth of the very, very poor choices that we have made have started to really hit home.
Hello, welcome back to the Brendan O'Neill Show with me, Brendan O'Neill, and my special guest this week, Francis Foster. Francis, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks. Lovely to see you as always, Brendan. You're looking great, by the way. What are you doing?
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I was just going to say this is the first time you've been on my podcast, which I feel is a terrible wrong.
It is, mate. It is. It's generational. I would put it as generational wrong has been inflicted upon me, Brendan.
It's shocking. You've been on the Spike podcast many times, and we always love that. But this is your first time on my podcast. I'm thrilled to have you on, not least because you've got this new book out, which is called, I'm going to say the title and then say what I think of it. It's called Uneducated, My Life as a Teacher and Why You Should Never Become One. It's really, really good. It's bloody funny. It has a Sue Townsend vibe to it, which is a high compliment. Sue Townsend is one of my favorite writers. It's excellent book. I highly recommend it to listeners to go out and buy it. So let's talk about it. Some people will be surprised that you used to be a teacher. They will know you better as a comedian, as a globe-trotting podcaster, as someone who causes a little bit of trouble in the public sphere of opinion and comedy. But you used to be a teacher. To kick off, tell us how that happened. How did you get into teaching? What was the driving force there?
Well, I didn't want to be a teacher. I wanted to be the new Marlon Brando, Brendan. That was the plan. Sadly, I'm not Marlon Brando. I don't look cool wearing white t-shirts, and every time I try and smoke a cigarette, it gives me a nosebleed. So I couldn't be Marlon Brando in The Wild Ones. So that didn't work out. So what happened is, I go, well, what do you do with a degree in drama? I mean, it's either become a teacher or work in a call center. And I tried working in a call center, and that was slightly less demeaning. I was going to say something horrific, but it was slightly less demeaning than something horrific. So yeah. So okay. So what happened was, I decided to become a teacher. I always wanted to teach drama, but I wanted to be, the prestigious actor returning to a drama school, giving master classes, and not teaching drama in Veruca-ridden drama studios in secondary schools in the East End and the southeast of London.
Yeah, those words you've just used there bring back memories of my drama classes at school. They were pretty awful. So is it fair to say you kind of happened upon teaching, which I guess is true for a lot of teachers? Maybe I'm wrong on this, you could tell me. But I'm guessing that a lot of teachers in the UK don't set out to be teachers. I doubt that they raised their careers guidance in school. I definitely want to be a teacher. But it's something that happens to people, I guess, when they're not quite sure what else they can do.
Oh, absolutely. So what invariably happens is, I think a lot of people who become teachers, number one, are very well-meaning. I think there's been this narrative spun with podcasts and cultural podcasts that teachers are all these kind of ultra woke, wanting to transition kids, sinister figures who are indoctrinating them into the magic of Lenin and Trotsky. The reality is that is not my experience of teachers. Most teachers are fairly well-meaning. All right, they're lefty, but they're very well-meaning. They just want to help, and no one gets into teaching for the cocaine and the hookers. You know what I mean? That's not what you do it for. So the reason that I got into it was because my original plan didn't work out. I always wanted to do teaching. I always enjoyed teaching and helping young people. And I thought, as far as careers and jobs go, it's a pretty decent and an honourable one, to be honest.
It is, absolutely. Agree with that. I always laugh when I read about woke teachers. I mean, there are woke teachers for sure, as you and others will be well aware. But I went to a convent school, so it was the opposite of woke. I was educated by nuns. Um, and I want to ask you a little bit about what's happened to schooling, what's happened to teachers, because some of the stuff you describe in the book is hilarious and scary at the same time. Like the school kid who kicked you in the balls. You go into some schools and they're like almost like prison camps, and you write in the book that you can always tell when a school's going to be a bit dodgy because it feels like a prison camp. Um, there's a great line where you talk about having to wear the supply lanyard so everyone knows that you're an idiot, that all the kids know you're an idiot they can take the piss out of, which is very true. Poor supply teachers get it in the neck. It all sounds so different to when I went to school. I went to a very particular school, run very severely. We still had the cane back in my day. That's how old I am. So I remember corporal punishment. So it was very different back then. But reading your book, I thought, God, things have changed enormously in schools. Is that your feeling too, from when you were at school as a kid to when you then went to school as an adult teacher?
I was always brought up to respect teachers. And look, there were people in school who didn't respect them. A lot of schools work like this. What they do is they identify the kids who are academic, who are bright, and they put them in one class. And there's kind of like a grammar school stream going right the way through secondary education. So if you're in that grammar school stream, you'll be fine. What happens if you're outside the grammar school stream, particularly in secondary school? You then get exposed to the unmitigated chaos that is the education system in the UK. And one of the things I noticed when I was teaching is that it's an impossible job. One of what I wanted people to get from the book is this: is that broken systems create broken outcomes and they create broken people. When you're an average teacher in a primary school, for example, you get given a class of 30 kids. On one end of the spectrum, you've got the kids who have got the potential to go to university. They're bright, they're able, they're intellectually curious. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got the kids who are so academically weak that they're unable to write their own name. And then you've got everything in between. And thanks to successive governments, what we have in schools is what's called a policy of inclusion. What that effectively means is they've closed a lot of the special schools, special needs schools, and then they drop these children into mainstream classes. So I've taught children who are nonverbal autistic, for example. I was never trained to teach nonverbal autistic children. That is an incredibly difficult job. It's an incredibly specialized job. And what we do now, because we want to make cutbacks and we disguise it under a liberal guise, policy of inclusion, we drop these children into these schools. They then get placed with, normally it's a lady or on a minimum wage. They're called a teaching assistant. They have 1 or 2 days training, if that, and they're expected to support these kids. And what this does is it fails every single person in that classroom. It fails the special needs child. It fails the other children because your attention is drawn to them. You can't challenge the high ability kids. You can't support the low ability kids. Everybody else in the middle gets lost. And what happens is we all get failed, including the teacher, because it is simply impossible to teach all of these kids in one classroom. And we pretend we can, but the reality is we simply can't. And what happens is children leave school thoroughly disillusioned with their education. Teachers leave the profession thoroughly disillusioned with teaching. It's a tragedy, Brendan.
This is one of the valuable things about your book, which is it's not just a wokeness gone mad book, which it's not just teachers are all blue-haired losers who think there are 72 genders, etc., etc. It does look in depth at the structural problems. I know structural is a bit of a lefty word, but you know what I mean, the kind of practical challenges that face schools when you have exactly the situation that you've just outlined there. but it's also funny. So people shouldn't be put off by my use of the word structural there. Um, but explain to us a bit what it's like being in that kind of classroom, because what you've just described earlier on, which is that you have this grammar school streak running through most secondary schools where the bright kids get put at the top class and the supposedly dumb kids, as we might have pejoratively referred to them in the old days, get put at the bottom class. That exactly happened at my school. We had 5 classes per year, and they were really strictly organized from cleverest to least clever. And the clever kids were given a lot of attention, and the not so clever kids were given less attention. That is the brutal truth of it. When you're in front of a class, say with more challenging children, children of whom there are not very high expectations, what is it like being in that kind of classroom? Do you feel sorry for the kids? Do you feel angry with them? Give us a sense of what it's like there.
I think the real, and we'll talk about the issues that stem from all of this, but I'll tell you a story which I think illustrates this. And I talk about the story in the book. I had to cover for a colleague who was, I think, had to go for some type of meeting, and they were a year 2 teachers, so it's 7 and 8-year-olds, and the kids were doing an exam. So I came in just to cover for the exam. And, it's very simple. You put the papers down, you put the pencils, you tell the kids what's going to happen in the exam, and off they go and do the test. And there was this one little boy, we'll call him Kieran. And I put the paper down in front of him and the pencil, and he looked at me and he said the words, "Mr. Foster, I can't read." And I said to him, "Kieran, I know, but I'm going to need you to do your best." And he looked at me again, his eyes welling up with tears, and said the words, "Mr. Foster, I can't read." And I said, "Kieran, I understand, but you're going to need to at least try." The test started. He put his head on the paper and he wept. And to the point where one of the teaching assistants had to take him out. And I said in the book, the only memory of Kieran that had been in that classroom was the tear-soaked exam paper glinting in the June sun. It's heartbreaking because a lot of the times what we're doing is we're setting these kids up to fail time and time and time and time again. It's the destruction of self-esteem. And it's really challenging. It's challenging for the teachers and it's challenging for the pupils. And what it does is it turns kids off school. Because why would you like something if you and I, look, we're fully grown men, but if we turned up every day to work and we were shit at it, excuse my language, after a while we'd go, you know what? Don't fancy it anymore. I'm going to find something else to do. Now imagine a child of 7 or 8 doing that. Your self-esteem would be through the floor. So it's really difficult and it's really hard. It's why I've got a lot of empathy for these kids, because to turn up every single day and fail at something every single day is it's a destruction of self-esteem. There's no other way of putting it.
Yeah, and the story of Kieran, is the name you give this kid, is really a shocking one. But it also, do you think, well, I guess I'll pose it as a question, do you think it speaks to a broader problem that may not manifest itself so extremely in some kids, but we do often read about declining literary standards amongst school kids having a lower reading age than their age group might have had 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Some kids apparently now leaving school, you'll know better than I do, leaving school at 16 or 18 and not being fully proficient in all of those kind of everyday literary skills that we might once have taken for granted. How bad is that situation, and what is the cause of that kind of thing, where education can't even get a 7 or 8-year-old kid to be able to read words?
I mean, it's a huge question, Brendan. Look, I think social media will definitely play a part of it. I think smartphones will play a part of it. I know I still have teachers who, in my family, friends who are teachers, and they tell me that the reward system for the kids' brains has been hijacked by these tablets, by these iPhones. So they find it almost impossible to read a book. I was actually talking with a friend of mine last night who's a writer. She's a very successful writer, ghostwrites many books, fan of literature. And one of her favorite books is Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. And she said, every 10 years or so, I reread Crime and Punishment because it's a masterpiece. And she said, you know something, Francis? I tried reading it a few years last year. I couldn't do it. I didn't have the attention span to be able to do it. The act of sitting and reading undisturbed for 2 hours has been lost to me. Now, just imagine a 8 or 9 year old boy or girl, and from the moment they are conscious, they have been sitting in front of an iPad or an iPhone. The act of reading a book, it must be impossible to them. It really must be. So I think that is one of the things that we are going to reckon with. We're already talking about banning social media. I think smartphones should be banned to anybody under the age of 18. I would think in about 40 years' time, we're going to look at the act of giving a child an iPhone very similar to the way that the Victorians gave children cigarettes. I think it's going to be that. I really do. Or, when people go, oh, you know what will help babies sleep? A little tot of whiskey.
Yeah, I think that's right. And listening to you say that really just made me think that when I was at school, which is a very long time ago, we didn't have smartphones or anything like it. Even then, it was difficult to get us kids to focus on a book. I mean, we managed it. I remember we used to have to read, I don't know why it comes to mind, but Evelyn Waugh's Handful of Dust. We all had to read out loud different passages. And it was quite a difficult thing to do. It demands a lot of concentration, a lot of thought. I'm talking about 13, 14-year-old kids. In this day and age, it must be near impossible for children who are constantly subjected to really quick, fast information on their phones to be able to focus in that way. Um, I, what do you think schools can do to counter that culture? Because I guess that must be the big question mark hanging over modern day teaching. They know that out in the world, children's brains are being somewhat fried by this kind of frantic flow of information. Is there something schools can do so that when a kid walks through the school gates, the culture shifts a little bit and they are expected to focus? What could schools do, do you think?
I think number one, just ban smartphones. I don't even see it as being a question anymore or a point of debate. I just think it's an essential. You don't need them. I was at school in the 90s. If your parents wanted to contact you, they called the school. That's fine. We all survived.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all seemed to be fine. We all called the school. One thing that I did is I made sure that every child had a reading book. The moment they came into school, they sat down at the table and they read a book. They just read a book. You come in, you hang your bag, you hang your coat, you get your book, you come in, you sit down. 8:15 or 8, whatever it is, 8:20, 8:30, 8:45, the bell goes, you do the register, you put the books away, you do the register, then you get ready for class. It's the only way of doing it. It's the only way of doing it. But we were going to be involved in one hell of a battle because my fear is that a significant amount of damage has been done to people's brains. And I include myself in that, Brendan. I find it as somebody who did an English degree. At 18 years old, I read the Odyssey, I read the Iliad, it was part of my degree, I read the Aeneid. Would I be able to do that now? I'm not so sure. And that is a travesty. It's a travesty. And it's been described many times as a social experiment that nobody agreed to.
The decline of the literary mind or just that literary way of thinking is something that actually gives me sleepless nights. I try to force myself to read for half an hour every day. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But it is a struggle. You have to kind of lock your phone away. You have to go into a dark room, put on a little reading lamp, hide away from the world because the pressures to do something else are so enormous, and they must be even worse for kids. Um, I did want to ask you about discipline and the question of discipline, because one of the brilliant things about your book is the chaotic scenes that you describe, which are funny and tragic at the same time. Kids, telling teachers to F off or even physically abusing them in some situations, and just the chaos in certain classrooms that you confronted. Um, is part of that down to a withering of discipline? do you think? I mean, because if you look back to, I know it's a bit of a caricature, but if you look back to images of schools from the 50s and 60s before our time, there were kids there who had extraordinary social problems, came from a kind of poverty we can no longer really imagine. Some of them will have lived in actual slums, which thankfully are now gone. And yet there was this very severe discipline, probably went too far sometimes, and it did mean that kids were able to concentrate. Is discipline a part of this as well, do you think?
Oh, this is a massive part of it. What the average teaching career now lasts like roughly under 5 years, and a lot of the teachers that you say when you ask them why they left, number one, it's always behavior because it grinds you down and you physically can't teach, and it is demoralizing. The reality is for practically every school in this country, state school, by the way, there are two or three kids in every class whose what seems to be their sole aim is to disrupt the lesson and create mayhem and chaos and stop the other 27 children or 28 children from learning. And because the power of teachers and schools is very limited, there's really not a great deal that they can do. And as a result, these kids are going in and destroying everybody's education, everybody's learning, lesson after lesson, day after day, week after week, month after month, to the point where there's a lot of teachers who quite rightly go, I shouldn't have to put up with this. And they leave. And I don't blame them because it's impossible to deal with.
Is part of the problem that teachers' hands are tied? I mean, I guess there must be a culture of fear among some teachers because I think you touch on this, which is, the danger that you could be accused of harming a child. In fact, you discuss a fight in a classroom, two boys really going at it, and you talk about the danger of putting yourself in between those kids as a teacher. Dragging the two boys away could be a risky business in case one of them accuses you of harming them. But I guess there must be other instances where teachers are scared of shouting at children in case the children says, you harmed my self-esteem or you made me feel bad. Is part of the problem that teachers' hands are tied? They're not given that kind of leeway to assert their authority. Maybe authority is a better word than discipline. You need a teacher with that kind of moral authority in the classroom, but it's hard for them to enact that, I guess.
Well, it's impossible, Brendan. It's impossible to enact that because they simply don't have the power. So as a result, the kids who want to cause mayhem and disruption, they're going to do it because quite simply they can. And also, this is another point. We're failing them
Yeah.
because they're not learning, they're not progressing. And what are we actually teaching them? We're teaching them that you can go into a situation, you can behave however you want, you will be indulged, you will be pandered to, and there will be no consequences for your behavior. And the reality is, unfortunately or fortunately, life simply doesn't work like that. You cannot behave like that in a place of work. You will be fired. You cannot behave like that in the street or the pub because you will be faced with a more rudimentary form of consequence. We're sending out the complete wrong message. And then we say to the kids who do behave well, oh, you know what? We're not going to pay you any attention. Your education is going to be destroyed. And it ain't going to matter because we prioritize the people, the small minority who refuse to behave.
Absolutely. There's this tendency to think that, the kind of post-discipline style of teaching is about being nice to kids. But actually, as you say, it often fails them because it doesn't give them one of the most important life lessons, which is that sometimes you've got to behave yourself. You can't just do what you want to do. I wanted to ask you about the class element in some of this, and what you think about private schools and schools in good catchment areas where often middle class parents will want to move in order that their kids can go to a good school. You talk in your book about the inner city schools in which you've taught and schools in pretty rough areas, where there are lots of parents and grandparents who have very high hopes for these kids, but they're often not met by the school itself. Um, is there a class element here? Do you think there are large sections of society that are just being left behind by these systems that you described, while others are able to escape it?
Oh, absolutely, undoubtedly so. One of the things I loved most about my job was teaching bright working class kids. To me, there was no greater thrill as a teacher. I remember I taught this one boy, and Carl, and he was, I mean, he spent a lot of his time, he was 11 years old, getting up to no good, but he was a fabulously talented mathematician. And I remember we did one exam, and Carl did no work for it. He was just naturally talented, naturally smart. And I remember he got 97% on his test, and I marked it, and I gave the test back to him 97%. And then he looked through it, and then on the cover of the exam paper, he wrote 3 words, like a boss. And then he just underlined it. And part of me was, I should tell you off for that, but it made me laugh. But yeah, we do. We fail kids. We fail kids. And that's one of the problems in our society. And people don't talk about this enough, Brendan, is the class element, particularly in our sphere. And I'll tell you why. Because there's a lot of people in Westminster or MPs who've only got there because daddy was an MP or daddy knew somebody or so on and so forth. And we've all met these people. And excuse my language, but they are utterly mediocre. And what you have when you don't have social mobility is the top level, what the elites, we shall call them for want of a better term. They get ossified, it gets calcified, they don't move. And you have people in those positions who, quite frankly, simply aren't up to the job. And I think that's a very real problem with our elites. There's no relegation. It ain't like the Premier League, which is by and large a meritocracy. There's a lot of people in there who simply don't deserve to be because they went to the right school and the right university. And you go, I know, one of my mates is a plumber. He's smarter than you. Not that there's anything wrong with plumbing, and he probably earns more money than an MP. And if you asked him to be an MP, he might probably wouldn't want to be. But everyone thinks you're the smart one.
Yeah. Mediocre is exactly the right word to describe so much of the political class at the moment, who got there, with sharp elbows and good connections rather than with raw talent. Yeah, and the waste of working class talent in this country, especially amongst the young, is so, so depressing. And I suspect it's getting worse as the kind of, these cultures develop even more. I did want to ask you about what you think of experiments that are designed to rectify some of the problems that you outline in the book and which you're talking about now. So, for example, the Michaela School in Wembley, Northwest London, people will be familiar with it, run by the brilliant Catherine Burblesing. I've visited it. I'm sure you have as well, I expect.
Yeah, I have. Well, I visited during COVID, so it was a bit different.
Yeah,
But yeah.
and it's well known because it's very disciplinarian. They sing the national anthem. It's like, it feels like a private school in how it conducts itself, but it's not a private school. It's for kids who come from often quite challenging backgrounds in Northwest London. What do you think about those kinds of experiments? Do you think we should do more of that to see if we can bring back that old style of education, but without the kind of cruelty or the menace? Because there's nothing cruel or menacing about that school at all.
What we need, Brendan, is, look, as somebody who taught in rough places in London, the more chaotic a child's background, the more structured and orderly the school needs to be. Because adults think structure and order is boring and it's tedious, all of these things. For a child, it's what you communicate is that this is safety. I feel safe here. I know that there's going to be consequences. I know that if somebody hurts me, they're going to be dealt with. I'm not going to walk into a classroom and fear that I'm going to be physically assaulted, which is what a lot of children fear in our schools. Or or something else awful is going to happen to me, because that doesn't happen in strict teachers' classrooms because they won't allow it. So when you have a head teacher like Catherine, the chances of that happening are a plummet. And as a result, children feel much calmer, much safer. They don't feel the need to retaliate because they trust the teachers to take care of them if something does happen, which inevitably it does when you're dealing with kids. So for me, I think that's the only way to teach. And particularly, it's the only way to teach kids from really troubled, chaotic backgrounds. The only way to do it. I remember I took over a class that was from a teacher who'd had a rough time. They couldn't deal with it. The relationship between teacher and class had completely broken down. And I went in, took over it, and with the help of my colleagues, we managed to turn the class around. And it was a real team effort. Not just me, it was all of my colleagues who helped me. And I remember one of the kids when he left, he gave me a card, standard card. Little Bulgarian boy, still remember him now, his face. And I remember opening it, and it said the words, "Thank you, Mr. Foster, for teaching us discipline." They get it.
Yeah.
Kids aren't dumb. They
Yeah.
understand. They really do. They don't want chaos.
Yeah.
No, I have never taught a child that wants to fail.
Yeah.
I've never met a kid who wants to fail.
It's so true, because we all remember when we were kids at school, and when a teacher who was a bit soft or a bit scared of the kids came in, the naughty kids knew instantly that they could exploit this situation. The kids who wanted to work knew that it was going to be disastrous. Kids can sense very well when there is a breakdown in order. And as you say, which I think is really important, safety, that feeling of safety in schools is so important. And when that breaks down and kids don't feel comfortable at school, then we've got real problems. Um, I did want to ask you about the education blob, which some people refer to it, which, I mean, it's a real thing in the sense that there do seem to be vested interests in maintaining this rather chaotic system. Yeah, I don't know what we would describe it as: post-discipline, post-high expectations, this kind of culture that fails kids. When Catherine opened her school, she got so much flack from the education blob because she was calling them out, calling them into question. Do you think have you experienced anything similar in response to your book, or do you anticipate a kind of pushback from the education blob, because they are quite guarded, aren't they?
Oh, they're very guarded. I mean, we've got the National Education Union, which I'm a former member of. I mean, they're called Reform a far-right party. 30% of this country vote for reform. You go, and then they put out statements saying that they want Gaza recognized as an independent nation state. Now, look, if you want, if you don't, that's up to you. You can make an argument. My own question is this: why is the National Education Union getting involved in Gaza? Do you not think there's enough problems with our education system for you to focus on? Maybe if you solve all the problems within it, you can have an opinion on Gaza or talk about Gaza. Until then, the fact that you talk about it and start saying that you want it into is utterly demented. Let's be fair. Let's be crystal clear. It is insane. That is not the purpose of the National Education Union. Nor is it to say that some parties are far right. Because what you're doing is alienating 30% of the people in the country, many of whose kids you teach.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's an incredibly important point, which is lost on these unions, sadly. Let's talk a little bit about wokeness. I mean, because it can become a caricature, the idea that, as you said earlier, the idea that all teachers are mad lefties. I mean, they might lean left, but as you say, they're pretty decent people who actually do want kids to do well. That's why these systems that you're describing are so frustrating, because they let down kids and they piss off teachers. But wokeness has found its way into the classroom, or certainly into the education system, in terms of some of the ideas that are taught. And, we've all seen the documentary about, the school that tried to stop being racist, for example, where white kids were berated for being white. And I'm sure there are many other instances where kids are taught stuff that they should not be taught. Do you think that's a real problem, or is there a tendency to exaggerate? How real is the wokeness situation in schools?
What I try and do is be honest about these situations, Brendan. I've always thought wokeness is a middle class obsession. It's particularly a white middle class obsession, but it's a middle class, upper class obsession. It's why Harvard and all the other colleges are so obsessed with it, because they've got nothing better to worry about, to put it bluntly. Where I taught, where you had kids whose parents were addicts, kids who were in gangs, you, kids who didn't go to my school but went to neighboring schools were getting murdered. I talk about the story of Billy Cox, who was 15 years old. Two men walked into his flat in Clapham, where he lived, shot him multiple times, walked out, and he died in his sister's arms. His sister was 13 years old at the time. So I never really experienced this because we were too busy just trying to survive. We were too busy trying to get the kids to actually get them through a day. Now, I've got friends who live in very nice she parts in North London who tell me their kids are getting taught all this nonsense. And I'm not, that may very well have happened, but I never experienced it because you can't really talk about decolonizing the curriculum when someone's about to throw a chair at your head. You know what I mean?
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, and I find that in fact with universities, when I speak less and less at universities because it seems more trouble than it's worth these days. But when the more red bricky university is, the more sensible students tend to be. You know, the working class students who actually want to learn, and it tends to be when you go higher up the food chain to the Ivy League or Russell Group universities that you see all this crazy nonsense. And even there, it tends to be a handful of students rather than students who actually want to get a degree. So I think it is a weird middle class obsession. It would be remiss of me, Francis, not to ask you a little bit about the world outside of schools, which of course impacts on the world of schools themselves. I wanted to get a sense of where you think we're at politically in this country with Starmer's government, uh, how long it's got left. It's astonishing the extent to which you remember Tony Blair was education, education, education. And that's what his whole drive was, and I'm sure he did some good things as well as some dodgy things. But at least education was a public discussion. It feels increasingly that it's no longer a public discussion. Certainly, you don't hear much from Starmer about it. But more broadly, how do you take the temperature of this government at the moment?
I think we're in a very, very, very dangerous place as a country, as a society. And I don't think it's all Starmer's fault. It's 14 years of a conservative government. You have to be honest, you have to be fair. They were terrible. In the words of Kemi Badenoch, we talked right and governed left. It's a very nice way of saying that we gaslit the population, which is what they did. I think we are in a political crisis. I think we're in an economic crisis. I think we're in a cultural crisis. We're in a societal crisis. And we have been a culture and a nation that has been addicted to lying to ourselves for a long time. And you can do that. You can do that for a long period of time, but eventually reality hits home. And where we are, Brendan, is reality, the unpleasant truth of the very, very poor choices that we have made have started to really hit home. Really hit home. Our complete refusal and inability to deal with mass immigration and embracing it and saying it's some kind of universal good has now been exposed as the horrendous lie that it is. Not wanting to deal with our debt crisis as it continues to spiral. We've now seen where we're ending up, where we're broke. Let's be fair. That's where we are. Our refusal to. I'm just trying to pick. There's so much. There's so much to talk about here. My worry is that the next election is going to be existential. I really do believe that because I think things are so bad now. I think things are so terribly awful that unless we have somebody in who is going to do a U-turn, who is going to look at the welfare bill, who's going to look at public spending, who's going to look at cutting the debt, who's going to look at dealing with mass immigration, dealing with the housing crisis. If we don't do that, I despair at where we're going to end up as a country. There are people I look at in our space, and I think that sometimes they take a certain glee at watching the demise of the country, like a sneering "told you so." I think that this is nothing but the most horrific tragedy that has been foisted upon a once great nation and its people. That's where I think we are.
That's very sobering, also very well put. I share your disdain for, I guess we could call it doom porn, this kind of celebration almost of Britain's decline, which is, often the people who celebrate it or smirk over it don't bear the real consequences of it. So that's quite annoying. Um, yeah, I agree with that. Francis, my final question for you before I let you go is your book really catalogs. I mean, it's a memoir as well as a kind of diagnosis of some of these problems. It really catalogs the chaos and the joy of the modern day school. It would be ridiculous if there weren't elements of joy in these institutions which drag in hundreds of children every day to try and be taught about the world around them. It's a very entertaining book, a very eye-opening book. If you were asked by someone in government to propose a few little tweaks to the education policies, what would you prioritize in terms of potentially fixing some of these problems in our schools?
It's the behavior. It's absolute behavior. If you take out 2 or 3 of those kids and you set up schools where they could be supported, where they could not only would they be supported, but they could be given work that they could access, that could challenge them, that where there would be more mental health support as to see what was actually going on in their lives. I think if you removed about 20 kids and put them in these schools or place them in these schools, I think it would be transformational. It would be completely transformational, both for them, for the other kids, and for the teachers.
Francis, thank you very much.